Yes, I mean the main purpose of this meeting is to hear Penny here, who's coming out from Scotland. So, well, the sort of things she raises, but we did think that it might. There's been a strong possibility that there will be people coming who wouldn't know very much about fracking at all, and that therefore I should do a thumbnail sketch of what the issues are and why we're opposed to it. And then Nigel should say a little bit more about those issues locally. So I've been giving a talk like this all around Nottinghamshire for the last 2 years, except it's usually a lot longer, and I will try and sort of condense it down very much. And nowadays I usually start off with this slide, which is to say that when we use the word fracking, the immediate thing that you think about is a process of fracturing rock deep underground by an engineering process. And of course, that is what fracking literally means. However, as a campaign, what we are opposed to are all the issues associated with the development of an unconventional gas field. And the problem with just using this word fracking is that people can get the impression that it is a problem of this process of fracturing rock deep underground. And the proponents, the advocates of fracking will say, well, it's 2 miles underground. There's usually a long way between where we're fracking and the aquifers, the sources of water higher up, and so there won't be any problem. Well, of course, that story leaves out the problem of the pipeline connecting the two, but we'll leave that aside for now, and I'll move on quickly. The difference between an unconventional gas field and a conventional gas field is that in a conventional gas field, they are tapping either oil or gas from a permeable rock layer. And because it's permeable, it will drain through the rock towards the well for a considerable distance. Whereas in an unconventional gas field, the problem is how to get gas or oil out of a rock that is not permeable. It's locked in the rock itself. So the fracking is really about creating fractures in that geological strata to let the gas or sometimes the oil out and then bringing it to the surface, which they do with explosions along a lateral well and very high pressure water laced with chemicals and sand. And the sand, which is pushed in with the water, holds the fractures in the rock open, and up comes the gas. But the key difference from the health and safety and environmental point of view, and from the point of view of the communities living in proximity to all this, is the intensity of the operation. Now the intensity, you can see in the top there's just one well. In the bottom there are lots of wells. In fact, in this there are 4 well pads on the surface. And coming off each well pad, there are 3 verticals going down and then 6 laterals. So in order to fracture that entire geological layer, you have to have 4 well pads. Now this graphic on the bottom actually is misleading as well, because what it doesn't show is the pipelines, the access roads and all those things that they have to build, and it doesn't show the high level of activity that has to go on the surface as well. So it's all those activities that we are concerned about, and that we want to draw attention to the intensity and the scale on which it happens. So this is a landscape which is a typical fracking landscape, and once you've got a landscape like that with all those activities going on, it's not easily compatible with other land uses, agricultural, leisure, nature reserves, or residential. And that's why this business about house prices going down is relevant. The reason house prices go down is quite simply you can't sell your house because nobody wants to move in. Nobody wants to move to an area like that because the quality of life collapses and the health of you and your children collapses for reasons which I'll say. So it's less desirable, and people are trapped there because they can't sell their houses to get out. Now when listen to the typical story told by people in the gas industry, they will tell you a story of fracking which relates to a single well. But the point I'm telling you is, the issue is it could never be a single well, because a single well would be uneconomic. You have to have 100 wells in an unconventional gas field to get out the same amount of gas that you would get out of one conventional gas well. You would have to have 100 roughly. So you would never get a single well, and that's why that statement, which is often trotted out about the probability of well failure for low is a single well, is very misleading. It's extremely misleading, because if the probability of a single well failing is, for example, in Pennsylvania, 8% in the first year and then rising in subsequent years, then if it's one well, the chances are it won't fail. But if there's 100 wells, then the chances are that you're going to have 8 failed wells in your area. And a failed well means a leaking well, and the water pollution associated with that. Also, in all the government documents and industry documents, you simply see this phrase, best practice. That's extremely misleading. What you want to know is what's average practice, what's normal practice. So there's an example. You often see this phrase, there are no proven incidences of water contamination that have occurred due to hydraulic fracturing. But that, again, is in the definition. It excludes incidences of the drilling damage, the fouled well casing, that's the cement sleeve around the borehole and the metal pipe. It excludes the tanker accidents. So there's some typical figures. Between 2009 and 2010, there were 4,000 Pennsylvania shale wells, 630 reported environmental health and safety violations, of which half were leaks and spills. There's a recent article which showed that in North Dakota, of every 3 wells, for every 3 wells there was a major water contamination incident caused by a spill at the surface. That's often radioactive water from deep underground, and water containing all sorts of chemicals, not just from the chemicals that were pumped down, but from the chemicals that were already in the ground 2 miles down, like benzene, toluene, xylene, ethyl benzene, radon, radium, you name it. That's a water pollution problem. There's also a pollution in air pollution. There's a phenomenon called gas field haze. There's a lot in a gas field, an unconventional gas field. It's not just about that process underground, as I say. You need to get the sand from somewhere to pump it underground to hold open those cracks. And so there's problems in the mining, the leaks from the pipelines, leaks of gas from the pipelines. There's compressor stations to compress the gas, to pump it through a pipeline network. They leak as well. If you think of your pressure cooker, it vents in order to maintain the pressure inside. In order to maintain the pressure in a gas network, you have to have venting as well. So you have flare stacks. So all this is going on. And then when you want to get rid of the water that's cummed up again, what they do in America is they pump it deep underground, and that's another process. Again, in addition to the water pollution problem, there's air pollution problem, because you've got a lot of traffic coming and going doing that. You've got a lot of machinery doing that, and so on. And all this is exacerbating the climate crisis as well. Frack gas is not used in addition to it. It's being used in addition to other fossil fuels. The fact that they're using frack gas doesn't mean that the coal isn't being used. The coal gets used somewhere else. Besides which, if we're really going to take the climate crisis seriously, the speed at which emissions have to reduce is so rapid that we don't have time for what is called this bridge to a low carbon future involving frack gas. Probably the worst thing of all is this leakage of methane. The technical term is fugitive methane. There's a big scientific controversy about how much leakage there is, but when you fly aeroplanes across gas fields, or when you look at gas fields using scientific equipment from satellites, what you see suggests that the leakage from gas fields in the United States maybe anything up to over 3%, sometimes up to 10% of the gas is leaking. And the leaking gas is methane, which is an extraordinarily powerful greenhouse gas. So if anything, this is making the climate crisis a lot worse. So official documents, if you read them closely, you will see that official documents, like this one written by an engineering consultancy called AMEC for the government, admit there are problems with wastewater disposal, the health of communities, health of workers, land use, geology, soils, landscape, visual amenity, biodiversity, habitats, ecosystems, noise, vibration, air quality, traffic, flood risk. They admit all of those things. But they say, regulation. The British regulation is the best in the world. We have gold standard regulation. British gold standard regulations are going to solve these problems. Here's the typical wording. It is assumed that current controls are enforced by regulators and followed by operators. Come on, what kind of world do these people live in? If you would actually look at what has happened so far in terms of the regulation, in Quadrilla, every single exploratory well has had some technical difficulty, and there have been 10 breaches of planning conditions, 5 examples of drilling problems, 3 reprimands, accusations of well integrity failure, trespass, blah blah. So it just isn't like that in real world. That's the problem. It's the same in Yorkshire. Rattling Energy in Hull breached 14 permit conditions between early July and October 2014. And this is exactly what happened in America, exactly what happened in Australia, and they get away with it because they've got political cover at a highest level. So what's the evidence? The man who runs INEOS is on record in The Guardian as saying that the evidence against fracking is based on hearsay, which tells you a lot about that man, actually. It tells you a lot about that man. It tells you this man pays no attention to issues of health and safety at all, because there are now 685 academic peer-reviewed articles about fracking, most of which have occurred in the last few years. And of those, 87% about air quality are indicating actual problems or potential problems. 69% of the ones about water quality are revealing actual problems or real problems. And the ones which are coming in about health hazards are coming in at 84%. Now these are not just potential, there are some studies in there which show actual increases in hospital admission rates, increases if you live near a gas well of cardiovascular problems, neurological problems, dermatological problems, and so on. So these are real problems, which is why 9 professors of medicine and 9 other senior medical figures, including a former deputy chief medical officer, have called for the banning of fracking. So when Jim Ratcliffe, the man who owns INEOS, who wants to frack Sherwood Forest, says that the evidence against fracking is hearsay, then he should be listening to 18 senior people from the medical profession. So the government says shale gas emissions are a low risk of public health. Not shale gas extraction is a low risk of public health. Note this very clever way in which they do it. And that's a report which excluded water sustainability, noise, traffic, odour, visual impact, occupational exposure, and so on. And it was also based on all the academic and scientific stuff before 2012, and that massive increase in evidence came in. And this is what the editorial of the British Medical Journal says. The report incorrectly assumes that many of the reported problems are experienced in the United States are the result of poor regulatory environment. This position ignores many of the inherent risks of the industry that no amount of regulation can sufficiently remedy, such as well casing, cement failures, and accidental spillage of well water. There's no reason to believe that these problems will be any different in the UK, and the report provides little evidence to the contrary. So I'll say no more of that. That's my truncated version. If you want my longer version, I'll do it another time. So, nice.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, I've also given this talk, or similar talk before, so for those of you who've seen it before, no apologies because it bears repeating. So that's just the main sources that we've got information from in terms of licence areas and so on. There are two main potential areas of shale gas in this area. One of them is the orange area here between Derby and Nottingham down towards Melbourne and Mowbray. It's called Wimberpool Trough. And the other that's more relevant to what we're talking about today, a much larger potential area. So it's everywhere to the north of Chesterfield, Mansfield, basically. If you take a line from Mansfield past Gainsborough, nearly to Leeds, nearly to Manchester, and then back down to Chesterfield, all of that area, the British Geological Survey says has potential for shale gas. That's a cross-section across the Wimberpool Trough and the Gainsborough Trough, the area in the north, and it's the orange area at the bottom, which is where there might be shale gas. So this is 3 or 4 kilometres down. This area here is that sort of area. So in fact, further north, North Nottinghamshire and into South Yorkshire, there's actually deeper potential layers of shale gas. Well, that's the target of what they're aiming at. In order to get to that, they will go through a layer of coal, which is here, and so there might be coal bed methane as well as methane from the shale gas down here, and they also have to go through aquifers. In terms of this area, this is the licences that the government has agreed to give out. Almost all of them in this area is INEOS, so you might find it difficult to see. That's Mansfield there, Chesterfield here, Worksop there, Retford there. This is Ollerton, and the sort of Sherwood Forest area. The Sherwood Forest Visitor Centre is in that sort of area, but all of this is Sherwood Forest. And this line here is the line of what the government thinks, or what the Geological Survey thinks, might have shale gas. So it's everything to the north of Mansfield, basically. And these are 10 kilometre squares, which have been let out as licences. And in this area, almost everything has gone to INEOS. It is now gearing up to well, initially to explore. This, just for reference, is on the left, groundwater source protection zones. So this is down the centre of Nottinghamshire, and that goes from Doncaster in the north to Nottingham in the south. Mansfield's there, Worksop here. All of this area is sandstone aquifer, where we get drinking water from. And what the government says is that there are small blue dots, which is where the water is actually taken from, and then an area around that dot. What the government says is you can't drill actually in the blue dot, but you can drill anywhere else through this aquifer. So most of this area, certainly to the northeast of Mansfield and to the southeast of Mansfield, is a groundwater source protection zone, they call it, except they're not going to protect it. The other map is a map of earthquakes. The British Geological Survey, it's minor earth tremors. This is the outline of the country. So this area is sort of central Nottinghamshire. The red dots are where there's been seismic activity, minor earthquakes, if you like, due to mining. And what they say is that Ollerton is the earthquake capital of the UK. So it's already a seismically sensitive area. This is what INEOS said. They've recently been advertising for people to assist them in developing this area for shale gas. This is background information that they produced for seismic testers. And what it says is that this process was undertaken to give the community an idea of the maximum number of well sites they can expect to see in a licence, as well as the number of wells. It shows up to 30 well sites within the licence and up to 396 horizontal wells. That's within an area of 6 miles by 6 miles. But it should recognise the example doesn't take into consideration the geology, the topography, etc. So this is the example they give. This is a 10 kilometre or 6 miles square, and these marks here are where they say there will be well pads. So every 2 miles there will be a row of well pads. The well pads will be about 1 kilometre apart. So that's 30 well pads within that zone. And these lines from the well pads are what Brian was showing earlier, the horizontals, which go out for a mile from the well pad. So that actually shows 360 potential horizontals from 30 well pads. Now, as soon as this was made public, INEOS immediately withdrew this from their website, though I think you can still get up one or two other anti-fracking websites. And they said, oh, we were mistaken. It's not up to 396 wells, it's only up to 100 wells. So this is a mock-up of what that might look up like. So this is the licence area we're in at the moment. So it's Mansfield here, where we are at the moment, at the bottom. Forest Town there, Clipstone, Mansfield Woodhouse, Market Warsaw, Meadenvale on the top right, Shirebrook on the top left, and Plesley there. So that's this 6 mile square area, and this is what it would look like if we had just 10 well pads. The well pads perhaps shown rather larger than they might be, and that's sort of 5 horizontals. And as you can see, there's plenty of other area that they could go for. They could easily get 20 well pads in here, and perhaps 200 horizontals. But that's what INEOS said they will be aiming at. 10 well pads with 10 or possibly 12 laterals from each one. In other words, the whole area will be fracked. They might initially start talking about a single well to explore, but that is what they will be aiming at over the next 10 years or so, if they get away with it. This is just some background information about INEOS. Large chemical company. A few years ago they had a toxic spill into the Manchester Ship Canal, and just last year I think they eventually went through to a fine of £166,000. So that's INEOS at Runcorn. This is INEOS at Grangemouth in Scotland. Breached health and safety regulations 34 times in 4 years up to 2015. Officially condemned as poor for pollution 3 years in a row. More than 20 staff injured since the start of 2015. That's in March. And this is a list of some of the safety violations that INEOS around the world. So INEOS at Grangemouth 2008, they got site at Cologne here. This is a picture of the fire at INEOS on the outskirts of Cologne. Ohio Clean Air Act violations, $3.1 million penalty for acrylonitrile and butadiene. Texas, more butadiene emissions. County Durham, PVC powder spread over a residential area. Cologne, burst ethylene pipe, threatened an acrylonitrile tank. 1,300 emergency workers had to work through the night to prevent that going up in a major explosion. The Scottish National Party revealed that in the 7 years from up to 2012, 761 breaches of sulfur dioxide levels. In the US in 2012, Failure to comply with rules on chlorine chemicals, fine $175,000. The Runcorn spill I've mentioned. Another one in Cologne, 2014, causing dense black smoke. And another failing at Grangemouth last year. So that is the sort of company. Gone?
Sorry, just to ask if we can probably possibly get that as a reference or resource at the meeting. Yeah. That's really powerful when we speak to councillors.
Yeah, let me go back to the beginning. That reference there, frack-free knots.
Okay.
So there's a handout. If you haven't got it, there might be still some left.
Thank you.
So that's the references are on that page there. Oops. That's just more information about the record of INEOS built on debts, moved their headquarters to Switzerland to avoid tax in the UK. They're talking about moving back for public relations reasons. So they might
only the headquarters, not the tax work.
Oh, right. Yes. And that's Jim Radcliffe, who Brian mentioned, who runs INEOS. And they were talking, this is the Liverpool Echo, was reporting they were talking about 200 wells for each 6 mile by 6 mile parcel of land, with the promise of 400 million for landowners. So if you completely trash the whole 6 mile by 6 mile area, then landowners might get some payments. And this is one of the public relations exercises that INEOS has been involved in. This was Chesterfield last year. They get primary school kids to put on their pink INEOS t-shirts and go for a fun run in order to champion the PR for INEOS. So that's me done. I'll hand over to Penny.
Thanks very much. I hope you won't mind us sort of rewrote my talk on the train, so I had to refer to my laptop. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to come to Mansfield and talk to you about my own experiences in Scotland in respect of the unconventional gas extraction industry. I first started looking at this industry really in about 2010. I'm environment editor of a website called aworldtowin.net. And I began to see stories about this new form of extreme energy extraction in the United States, and I started to follow it then. And then we had the earthquakes in Blackpool and the subsequent moratorium, which was then lifted under pressure from George Osborne, who was in turn under pressure from his father-in-law, and the decision of the Cameron-Osborne leadership of the Tory party that we were going to be going all out for fracking in the UK. Subsequently to that, I with other people, wrote a book called Fracking Capitalism, which I can't sell you a copy of it because it sold out 2 editions. It's a bit out of date now anyway. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to sit down so that I can see my notes. Because for me, this fracking is nothing to do with energy. Okay, INEOS do not want this gas in order to secure, the UK's national gas supplies. They want it as a cheap feedstock for their gas cracker at Grangemouth and their chemical plants at Grangemouth and at elsewhere. Okay, so it's nothing to do with energy. So you have to say, what if it's some form of energy extraction and it's very risky, then why is it happening? I would say that this is a social and political question rather than simply a technical question. Because we're being subjected to the most massive government and industry-backed campaign to try to force communities to accept fracking and other unconventional gas extraction. And to achieve this, Tory government has overturned centuries-old property laws, trespass laws, bribed local authorities, huge tax breaks, a significant investment of public money to get it going, and a huge transfer of public funds out of the promotion and development of renewable energy and into fracking. So we have to say, well, why is that? And I'm going to skip a lot of the stuff that I was going to say to you, because I can see that really people here know about the technical side, okay? I'm going to say a bit about jobs, because this is the one. See, people, I suspect, I fear, that most of the people in this room are already against fracking. But the problem that we've got is that the big pressure is going to be on people who are desperate for work. People who are desperate for a decent wage. And the government is going to claim that this industry will create 64,000 jobs. Good jobs, they always say. Well, of course, that figure was conjured up out of the air by Ernst & Young on behalf of the Institute of Directors. Now, the government themselves, we've asked Ernst & Young to tell us how they arrived at this figure, and they've declined to publish that. But in fact, the government itself has a much more respectable figure at its fingertips. The AMET report, which Brian referred to, actually also included a prediction about jobs. And it said that 15,900 to 24,000 full-time equivalent jobs, direct and indirect, would be created at peak construction, that is the peak of the industry, by this shale gas industry. But that figure which the government itself was using in its press releases, has mysteriously disappeared. And if you look on the government's website, if you want to find out about jobs, it refers you to the Institute of Directors website. So they trashed their own figure, which was actually very carefully worked out, and replaced it with this fiction. And what kind of jobs? So in the planning phase, it's office-based roles, administration, legal and planning officers, field officers who will go out, who will be office-based but will go out into the field, such as geologists and engineers. And these jobs are going to be in remote company offices, possibly not even in the UK. And certainly nowhere near any of the communities that are going to be facing the fracking operations. And Helios recently held a big recruitment operation for people to run their Scottish fracking operation, which, by the way, we have a moratorium in Scotland, so, but they're obviously very confident about what's going to happen now that the Scottish elections are over. And where did they advertise? They only advertised it in London, and all the interviews were in London. So not many jobs there. So then during the drilling phase you get riggers, welders and surveyors. And those jobs will last a few months, and certainly less than a year. And some people suggest 9.8 full-time equivalent jobs per well. But the teams will move from well to well and drilling area to drilling area. So, I mean, what's happening? If you count 9.8 full-time equivalent jobs per well, those people are then going to move on to another well. You can't claim that as another 9.8 jobs. So there's a lot of double or even treble or quadruple accounting going on here. There's a lot of talk about spending in the supply chain, and this is a big issue in Scotland where, you know, there's a desperate crisis in the North Sea oil industry and people are tempted to clutch at straws. But the boss of Quadrillo made very clear recently that in his view, this desperation of the supply companies is a great opportunity for his company to screw them right down on price. There is some scope for jobs in the production phase. Petroleum engineers, wellhead operators and site managers. And they could be sort of semi-permanent communities. These could be people who will rent a house in the area. Or maybe stay permanently in the week in a bed and breakfast and go home for the weekends or whatever. But given the short lifespan of the companies and these jobs, they'll move on within a few years. So the spend in the supply chain and in the local economy is going to be temporary and minimal. And if we think about the longer term, bigger picture, rapid industrialization of rural communities followed by a subsequent bust will lead to a loss of identity and hope. And we know this from the experience of the mining industry, where rural farming settlements became mining villages, and these mining villages are now still struggling to work out a new purpose and identity for themselves following the ending of the coal industry. 150,000 jobs lost in Pennsylvania this year alone in the extraction industry. And communities are being left with thousands of abandoned wells as these small to medium-sized drilling companies go bankrupt and simply walk away. Where do these communities go from here? You know, their lives, their communities have been destroyed in the name of this industry, and they are left with the long-term consequences. Areas where there's intensive gas extraction will find that other kinds of companies are unwilling to move in. Houses will lose their value, the housing market will stagnate with the loss of construction jobs. Not only homes, but businesses will find insurance difficult to come by and expensive. And tourist areas are particularly at risk, because people don't want to spend their holidays breathing condensate in a gas field. So any marginal increase in jobs is likely to be A, temporary, and B, eliminated by other losses. And the companies won't clean up. The Tory government has eased the rules so that it's easier for companies to simply walk away. Local authorities will find it very hard to impose special clean-up conditions unless there are national conditions. And in any case, what does cleaning up mean? You know, the wells, and the leaking pipes and the fracking fluid is down there forever. And they'll go on, leaking fluid and chemicals. Health and safety is a big issue in my view. You're telling people there's going to be jobs. You know, in the US, there are thousands of workers suffering from a range of unexplained illnesses. And the silica sand used in the fracking process puts them at risk of silicosis. Now, INEOS will tell you, and they have said this, and they'll come here and they'll tell you, it's all different here because of regulation and health and safety rules are better here and so on. But here in this mining area, some of you will recall how the National Union of Mine Workers had to fight for safer working conditions and recognition and compensation for conditions such as pneumoconiosis and vibration white finger. Years it took to get any recognition that the industry was responsible for these conditions. And of course, that was a nationalised coal industry. How much worse will it be with the corporations? Sorry, I'll just carry on.
Just one point I want to say. It's only just come down that when we're economies, classed as a satisfactory reduced up until 10%. So that's just one point we're realising there.
So, I mean, and there are people still dying, you know, people who died from asbestosis before they even got any compensation. So who is this biggest licence holder? Well, INEOS, we've seen about their health and safety record. basically this is a chemicals company that has grown rapidly through debt-driven acquisitions. Basically, they borrow money and they buy things that other big companies don't want to keep. And they drive them back into profitability by changing the working conditions. And sometimes through innovation, it has to be said, in their markets. For example, in the States, they're quite leading in biodegradable packaging, but not here. Unfortunately, here in the UK, we only get the dirty end of things. The workers at Grangemouth were threatened that they would close the plant down unless they accepted worse working conditions, worse pensions, and signed a no-strike deal, which in the end they did. So let's just think a little bit about why is our government so desperate to get this kind of industry going? Why is it so attractive to them? It can't be because of the profitability, because the profitability is in steep decline. And at this point, with oil prices where they are, they reckon that at least more than 2/3 of the current fracking in the United States is actually not profitable now. So it can't be that. So I think it's because of the way the capitalist system works. In the US, fracking has sucked in masses of investment. And it is in effect a new subprime bubble. The early investors, using cash created by quantitative easing, cash that you and I allowed to be created by bailing out the banks, has been pouring in to these kinds of bubbles, the London property market and so on, and fracking in the United States. The early investors made a load of money and got out. And the investors who are still in will lose their shares. And a great deal of this institutional debt that's been sucked into fracking in the United States, which is no longer profitable and subject to a wave of bankruptcies, those investors, some of them pension funds, will suffer terribly because they won't get their money back. This is Andrew Critchlow, definitely not a radical, the editor of the Daily Telegraph. He says, this rush to pump more oil in the US has created a dangerous debt bubble in a notoriously volatile segment of corporate credit markets, which could pose a wider systemic risk in the world's biggest economy, by encouraging ever more drilling in pursuit of lower oil prices. The US Department of Energy has unleashed a potential economic monster and pitched these heavily debt-laden shale oil drilling companies into an impossible battle for market share against some of the world's most powerful low-cost producers in OPEC. And that, of course, as we know, is exactly what has happened. So, basically what it's about making money out of short investments. And, of course, as you know, this government are extremely influenced by what happens in the City of London and by the pressures that they're put under. And in effect, our government is acting as a snake oil salesman for the industry precisely because it is a government that rules us on behalf of these corporations and these smart investors. The inflation of a fake bubble is their only vision, their only solution for restarting a slowing economy and having any hope of reducing the deficit, which, as you know, continues to increase. And this backward-looking and discredited vision of fossil fuel investment is being foisted on us, really in the interests of the 1%. And we are the 99%, and as always, we are the ones who are going to pay the price. The corporations cannot make a fast enough buck out of renewables. So the government move the public subsidies out of renewables and into fracking. It's as simple as that. But actually, some of the more forward-looking companies are actually changing their perspective. I think it's EOS, one of the big 6 energy companies. They've just sold all their gas extraction interests in the North Sea. They want to liquidate that money because they want to invest in a huge offshore wind farm off the coast of Germany. And, you know, the development of renewables is a big part of this fall in the oil price. It is beginning to have an impact. And a lot of companies want to get out. Why is our government trying to tie us to the rabid tail end of a fossil fuel industry that is at the end of its life, not the beginning, whose time is over and past? It is quite simply because they are under pressure from private investment banks and corporations to do it. As Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, said, it's increasingly difficult to tell the difference between the fracking companies and the government that's supposed to be regulating them. The fracking companies and the investment brokers who are trailing along behind them. So what we have to say is there's no democratic decision making here. Support for fracking is down to about 19% nationally. And we know how many people supported it in Ryde. 36 out of about 4,500 respondents to the public consultation supported fracking. So I would say that this dash for unconventional gas, what it shows is we urgently need to advance beyond the current corporate post-democratic market state and establish a real democracy. Communities have to come together and write their own community charter, as they have in Falkirk, and include in it things that they care about and that they value. And on that basis, they should then grant or refuse a social license to any development in their area. And they have to be ready, we have to be ready, with all forms of political action to make sure that these social licenses can be enforced. We need to break out of our hollowed out democracy and start to create the transition beyond corporate rule. This is our peasants' revolt, this fracking business. This is our levellers' moment. This is our Chartist movement. We need a new social and political structure where we can collectively plan our economic development, our community life, and energy production in our interests and for the benefit of people and planet. So I would argue, and this is not a party political thing. Leave this party political old hat stuff at the door. We're not going to be sectarians here. What we're talking about really is having a democratic future where we can defend our lives and the lives of our children and our families from this ferocious, dirty industry. I didn't say much about Scotland, but I'll tell you what's happening there.
Do you want to come to the front? We're going to have questions now, and Brian and Nigel can bring some chairs to the front, and people can ask a couple of questions, and then we'll do that.
Do you want to be chairperson? You.
Yeah. Okay. This guy here.
It's not really a question, it's basically something that what it's come today and what it's come today, but it's very much showed the problem we've got with the government side of things and how they want it, so they don't care what anybody else thinks or what they're going to do. We use everybody, including the police, to back them up to make sure they get their own way. We know that. I mean, if this is a different scenario, like different as the magical, and there's a rule that will change with the police and everything. We did what we wanted, end of story. But this is a different scenario around here. And what we've not touched on here today, which I think is quite relevant to this area as much as anything, is the fact that how they do the explosions underground to do the fracking to get at the gas and stuff. Right. By doing that, if you look at the situation with them wells, you stick that under Nottinghamshire, stick that under Mansfield, Forest Town, Bilstall, we've already got a rabbit warren and mining tunnels under us that nobody seems to take any notice of. The water is a very important thing, obviously, I understand that, that's to focus on. But from my point of view, the reason I'm saying this is because I recently had an argument with a bloke about fracking, and I was telling him we need to stand up against it. He goes, no, leave the revolution and all that. And I said, don't be saying that we can't sell your house. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, we won't be able to sell your house because of the reasons you explained today. Now, we're going to look at a potential for failure under us at any given time. We've got subsidence pipeline, the mines that we've got are settled, but they'll soon be unsettled by all this. The methane that's already under the ground will come up anyway. And even, again, not being touched on today, is the fact that we grow correct if I'm wrong, so I'm trying to pick up these points. Is it something like we only get 33% of the gas anyway, the rest sort of goes off into the structures, the ground structure, and can come out anywhere, any place. They haven't actually harvest 30% of it, the rest of it goes off, is that right?
Well, certainly in terms of if you're talking about coal bed methane capture, yes, the capturing of gas from coal bed methane capture is pretty minimal.
Yeah, but the rest can just go off into the. I mean, this is as in America. There was gas coming out 7, 8 miles away from places, killing horses in fields. You sort of find its own way out. And that gas has been released by one, but that we don't get just comes into our. Basically, it's going to come up into our houses. It can come up anywhere. And from our area, we've already got methane in these tunnels underground. Methane's in there from anybody that see it was mining now. The methane has to be kept under control while the mines are open, by people working down there. Since those mines are closed, there's nobody down there on Saturday checking that the methane levels are not safe and getting air pumps going. Air pumps aren't there anymore, the structure's gone. Doing that. So we've got this massive potential for anything from underground fires to literally the ground sinking at any given time. Well, we weren't there because, but the amount of wells you're looking at there, if we put that Forest Town, say, the Forest Town area that's in blue, we're in a massive, big problem, anybody, in a lot of places in England, because of our prices and everything will plummet. Basically, the substance side of things alone is a problem.
I think you probably know as much as we do on some of those questions. What I can say is I've seen documentaries in which whole villages in the United States have had to be relocated precisely because of this business of gas coming up from the coal bed methane extraction process, as you're saying, and the dangers of just continuing to live where people are. But I don't think that's fracking. But in the circumstances, if you were to, if they frack in an area where there's already very, very extensive coal mining workings, then you may well be right. And again, you can see these documentaries and YouTube clips from Australia where the methane is bubbling up in the Condamine River, and people just put a match to it, and you get continual fire in the river. So yeah, I think these are real issues.
Is it not true as well that when they say putting money into the community, it's more or less been proven around and about that this money that goes into the community doesn't really go to the community per se. It goes into improving their road structures to their wells, so they've got a really nice road to their well. It don't matter if you haven't got a nice road outside your primary school or anything like that, but they will make sure the roads to the wells are all right, cope with the amount of traffic that's going to be dealing with them, and that's where the money goes. It does go into the community, but only to benefit the inroads to the wells and all this infrastructure to put the wells together. Is that true as well?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we looked at the figures that INEOS were putting forward. We worked out that we work out about 6p per person in communities in Scotland where they're talking about. So it's not exactly lavish, And I mean, the whole of the central belt of Scotland is on a former mining workings. And when you buy a house in Glasgow, you get a thing called a mining report. The mine workings under there could date back to the 14th century, you know. And they didn't go very deep in their days, but, you know, you have to get this thing called the mining report. The whole of the central belt of Scotland was earmarked for this industry by the UK government. All of it. Edinburgh, Glasgow, Falkirk, right the whole where everybody lives, basically. Everybody in Scotland lives more or less in the central
If you
belt.
carry out any form of underground explosion, you've got potential of displacing anything. Some of these tunnels are also full of water, that could sort of push its way anywhere.
And we made all these points too. These points were made at the public inquiry into Dart Energy's application to do coal bed methane capture there in Falkirk. And the company quite simply just denied it and said it wasn't true and that it would all be fine. So, you know, the thing is, yes, we will make these points, and, you know, we're in Scotland, the government, we've got a moratorium, the government is doing an evidence gathering thing, and we're going to put our submissions in. But at the end of the day, these are going to be, in my view, political decisions, and the government in the UK has made it much harder for your local authority to refuse permission and narrowed down the scope of the things that the local authority can take into account. So it's going to make it harder for local authorities to say no.
The lady at the back.
I've been trying to read through the 240-page report from North Yorkshire, and I totally agree with Ryan that, you know, of course we know what they say they're going to do in practice never happens. The point is, and I think you just said that, it's very hard for local authorities to refuse these because they can, you know, they've got deep pockets, they can do risk assessments, strategic environmental assessments, they can answer every technical point, and even if the local authority refuses, not on planning grounds, they can appeal and the local authority will be subject to cost. So a lot of local authorities are going to be really nervous refusing that. So I think although, you know, local communities need to protest and throw things at it, I think it needs to be tackled at a national policy level. And I think it's not just, I mean, apart from, I agree, Penny, about sort of, you know, the capitalist drive for this, but I think there's a lot of, you know, fairly learned people who still support fracking because they see it as an alternative, you know, a transition to a low carbon future. And I think what we need to do is show that we can be fossil fuel free, but we also need to have local, you know, projects in communities. And unfortunately, now that, you know, the tariffs, the internet have gone, communities can't produce viable business cases to produce renewables locally. So I just wonder what you see as a sort of viable alternative that we can present at the national level to say we don't need fracking to, you know, to substitute the gas, we can produce it, you know, renewably. What do you see as the sort of positive story that we can present?
Yeah, well, there is a big positive story, and touched a little bit on that in what I said, in that the as it were, the front of the wave is already moving towards renewables. And I have to say, even within the capitalist system, that's the case. You know, the front of the wave for change is towards renewables. I mean, China is going to develop massive renewables capacity over in the coming years.
But all of DEC's statistics and analysis show, you know, some residual gas by 2050, which I don't think we need. But the discourse at policy level in government is still assuming we need gas in the future.
But there's a good reason for that. And the reason is that when the Condem coalition government took office, the first thing they did was sack all the experts on renewable energy from the Department of Environment and Climate Change and replace them with fossil fuel experts. That's why it was a conscious political decision. They actually actively threw out all the renewables people that had been employed there before, were developing these concepts, who were responsible for some of the good policies like the feed-in tariffs and so on. That's actually what happened. You read all about it in my book, Fracking Capitalism, which you can actually download for nothing online. This is what happened. So,
can I come in on this? you can read my different take on these issues in my book called Credo, Economic Myths of the World in Crisis. I've got a slightly different take on this to Penny. I think that the actual reduction in energy demand is the most important thing of all, really. And there's a lot of scope for reducing energy demand, not just in terms of strict energy efficiency, more energy efficient houses and so on, but in the sense of sharing things. The more things we share, I mean, like extending the library principle into many other aspects of life. I don't want to talk about that mainly. What I want to talk about is the fact that INEOS in this area don't